At my graduation party, my brother grabbed the mic and said, "Let's toast to the family black sheep who somehow got a degree." Everyone laughed. My mom smiled. "He's just joking." I smiled, too, and said nothing. 3 days later, I pulled my funding from his business startup and froze the shared loan account. But at 8:12 a.m., they got the real shocking news. I didn't think my graduation party would be the place where the first crack in my family ties would appear, but I guess you never see it coming. It was supposed to be a day I'd remember for all the right reasons. I had just turned 22, finished my degree, and somehow managed to build a small but profitable business while studying full-time. It wasn't luck. It was long nights, skipped weekends, and saying no to more parties than I could count. The backyard was dressed up like it belonged in a magazine spread. My mom had gone all out. White folding chairs, lined up under strings of lights, tables covered in blue tablecloths, the smell of roasted chicken and baked mac and cheese drifting through the air. Relatives I hadn't seen in years came out of nowhere. Friends from college, neighbors, even my old high school basketball coach stopped by to shake my hand. It was the first time I felt like all that grinding, all that self-discipline had been worth it. Somewhere between the second round of toasts and the cake cutting, my brother Alex drifted toward the microphone. He had that loose, confident walk he uses when he's about to tell a story that makes him the center of attention. I thought maybe he'd say something nice. Maybe a quick congrats, maybe even a story about us as kids. Instead, he raised his cup and said loud and clear, "Let's toast to the family black sheep who somehow got a degree." It was like the air in the backyard split in two, half laughter, half awkward silence. Most people laughed, thinking it was just brotherly banter. Some looked at me with those little smirks that say they think there's truth behind the joke. My mom, standing near the grill, smiled and said he was just joking. I smiled too, but inside I was thinking about the reality behind his little performance. Alex is 29, no degree, never stuck with a job for longer than 8 months. He's the kind of guy who talks about making it big while borrowing money to cover rent. For the past year, I'd been helping him with his latest big idea, a startup he swore was going to take off. I had even agreed to a shared business loan account with him because I thought maybe for once he'd follow through. The truth is, I had been overlooking a lot. The missed deadlines, the fact that he never seemed to put in the same hours I did, the casual way he treated money that wasn't entirely his. But this, humiliating me in front of our friends, extended family, and even some people I barely knew, this was different. This wasn't just a bad joke. It was a reminder that in his eyes, I'd always be the kid brother who got lucky, no matter how hard I worked. I didn't say a word to him that night. I cut the cake, shook more hands, thanked everyone for coming, and pretended the joke rolled right off me. But when the party was over, and I was sitting in my apartment, looking at the half-burnt string lights in my backyard, I decided something quietly and completely. 3 days later, I called the bank. I froze our shared account. I sent an email to the small development team we'd hired for his startup, informing them my funding was done and my involvement was over. I didn't explain to Alex. I didn't warn him. The following morning at 8:12 a.m., he and his wife woke up to find their accounts suddenly lighter, their project stalled, and the bank unwilling to move forward on anything until internal disagreements between account holders were resolved. That was only the first domino. The real hit was still coming, and they had no idea it was about to land right on their front door. At 8:12 a.m., my phone lit up with Alex's name. It wasn't unusual for him to call in the morning, but usually it was to check in, which really meant easing into asking for something. This was different. He didn't just call once. He called at 8:12, 8:14, and 8:17, each time letting it ring until voicemail picked up. By 8:20, my voicemail icon was glowing like a warning light. I listened to the first message. His voice was sharp, confused, and already on edge. He wanted to know why our joint loan account was frozen, why the development team had called him to say all work was paused until payment resumed, why his startup website was offline. He said I was making everything way harder than it needed to be. I didn't respond. I wanted him to sit in that uncertainty, to actually feel the consequences for once without me stepping in to smooth things over. At 9:30, my mom called. That alone told me Alex had already run to her. She didn't waste time. Said Alex was upset that I should at least talk to him and sort it out. Claimed he was counting on this for his future, and that pulling out now would destroy months of work. I told her the truth. I wasn't financing someone who thought humiliating me in front of family and friends was good comedy. She tried the old lines. He was joking. Don't take it so seriously. You know how your brother is. When I didn't budge, her voice shifted. She told me I was punishing the whole family by doing this, that my decision wasn't just hurting him. That sentence stuck with me. She didn't say Alex was wrong. She didn't say he owed me an apology. All she cared about was that I wasn't playing the role I was supposed to, the younger brother who props up the older one, no matter how little he deserves it. By noon, I had decided to take the next step. Alex and his wife lived in a 2-bedroom condo on the edge of the city, technically in his name, but the mortgage payments had been coming from my account for the past 14 months. It started as a short-term arrangement when they were getting the startup off the ground. But given how things were going, there was no point keeping that arrangement alive. I drove over without telling him I was coming. When he opened the door, he looked like he hadn't slept. His hair was a mess, his shirt wrinkled, and there was this faint smell of stale coffee in the air. Inside, his wife sat on the couch, laptop open, papers spread out like she was doing damage control. I didn't sit down. I told him directly. Starting next month, the mortgage was on them. No more payments from me. No more just until we get on our feet. The arrangement was over. For a second, he didn't say anything. Just stared at me like I had switched to another language. Then came the excuses. It was all just a joke. I was overreacting. I should have known he didn't mean anything by it. He claimed I was being petty, throwing away years of brotherhood over a few words. I told him we weren't partners anymore, in business or in anything financial. He could run his startup however he wanted, but he'd be doing it with his own resources. I didn't care if that meant cutting back, taking a job, or shutting it down entirely. It wasn't my problem anymore. He tried one last angle, said I was abandoning him, that I wasn't thinking about family. I didn't even answer that. I just turned and left. Walking to my car, I didn't feel guilt or second thoughts. I felt something closer to relief. It was the first time in years I wasn't carrying his weight on my back. But if I thought this was the end of it, I was wrong. The following week, my parents called with an invitation to a big family dinner. They said it was important, that everyone needed to be there. They didn't mention that my dad had already decided he was going to confront Alex. And when he did, it wouldn't just stun my brother. It would send the whole evening into chaos. When my mom called about the big family dinner, she made it sound casual, like one of those midweek meals where everyone piles into the dining room, passes food around, and half the conversations happen over each other. But the way she insisted I absolutely needed to be there told me it wasn't just about dinner. This was an ambush. I debated not going. I already knew the script. They'd downplay what Alex did, call me overly sensitive, and try to guilt me into unfreezing the account and covering the apartment again. But a part of me wanted to see how they'd handle it. When I walked in, the table was already set. My mom had gone all out. Roast chicken, mashed potatoes drowning in gravy, her garlic bread that could knock a person out from 2 rooms away. The dining room lights were bright, almost too bright, like they were staging the scene. My dad was at the head of the table with a glass of iced tea, looking unusually serious. Alex and his wife were already seated, leaning toward each other, speaking in low voices before straightening up when they saw me. We all sat down, and for the first 20 minutes, it was surface-level chatter. My mom asked about my business, then quickly moved on to the neighbors. My dad mentioned the leak in the garage roof. Alex made a half-hearted joke about traffic, but I could feel it. The shift in the air when my mom finally decided it was time. She put down her fork and said, Families shouldn't let small misunderstandings turn into big problems. She didn't say my name, but her eyes stayed on me the entire time. She went on about how life was too short for grudges and how everyone makes mistakes when they're trying to be funny. Before I could even decide how to respond, my dad set his fork down with this deliberate clink. He turned to Alex and said, "You should have thought before you opened your mouth at that party. You embarrassed your brother in front of everyone. And you're lucky all he did was pull his money." The room froze. Alex stared at him like he'd misheard. My mom's eyebrows shot up like my dad had just switched sides in the middle of a chess game. His wife dropped her gaze to her plate and didn't move. Alex tried to recover, leaning back in his chair. It was a joke. Kurt's taking it too seriously. He knows I didn't mean anything by it. My dad didn't let him finish. He told him that hiding behind "just kidding" was the oldest trick in the book, and that if he respected me at all, he would have apologized right after it happened, not waited until I cut him off financially. He didn't raise his voice, but there was a weight in his tone that made it clear he wasn't debating. That's when my mom jumped in. She leaned toward my dad like she couldn't believe what she was hearing. She said, "That's just how brothers are, that I knew Alex was joking and that I was the one making a mountain out of nothing." She looked at me and said I'd gone too far. Alex, sensing backup, folded his arms and stayed quiet, letting her fight for him. He even smirked at one point like this was going exactly the way he planned, except for my dad's part. I didn't respond to any of it. There was no point. They had already decided I was the problem because I stopped playing the role they expected from me. So I pushed my plate forward, stood up, and told them I wasn't explaining myself again. The silence as I walked to the door was heavy, but I didn't look back. I figured that was the end of their family intervention, but I underestimated them, because 3 days later, Alex and my mom teamed up for something I didn't see coming. A stunt meant to corner me into helping him again. And that was when things stopped being just tense and started feeling like a war. 3 days after that dinner, I was coming back from a morning meeting with a potential investor when I spotted a large white moving truck parked directly in front of my apartment building. At first, I thought one of my neighbors was finally leaving. The couple upstairs had been threatening to move to Florida for months, but when I got closer, my stomach sank. Alex was standing at the back of the truck, directing 2 movers like he owned the place. His wife was on the sidewalk holding a cardboard box labeled kitchen, wearing that tight smile people put on when they're trying to act casual about something that's anything but. I walked up slowly. Alex spotted me and broke into a grin like this was some kind of surprise party. He clapped his hands together and said, "Perfect timing. We're just about to start unloading." I stared at him. "Unloading where?" He tilted his head toward my building. "What do you think? Your second bedroom's been empty since you moved in. We figured we'd crash here for a couple of weeks, just until we get settled." No, I didn't raise my voice. I just said it once, and I thought that would be enough. But Alex laughed like I was playing along, turned toward the movers, and told them to start bringing things inside. I stepped in front of the building entrance. "No, you're not moving in here." His wife shifted the box in her arms and tried to jump in, explaining how their condo's new landlord had decided not to renew their lease and how everything had happened so fast they didn't have time to find a new place. She said this was temporary, and we're family. Then I noticed something over her shoulder. My mom's car parked halfway down the block. She was leaning against the driver's side door, arms crossed, sunglasses on, watching like a general overseeing a battle she'd already decided she was going to win. So this wasn't desperation. This was planned. I turned back to Alex. "This isn't happening." He tried the guilt angle, said I was being cruel, that they had nowhere else to go, that his kid didn't deserve to be caught in the middle. I told him there were plenty of other relatives they could call. And if there weren't, maybe that said something about how they treated people. That's when my mom strolled up, slow and deliberate. She didn't yell, but her voice was sharp enough to cut. She told me I was turning my back on my own blood, and that if I let them walk away today, I'd regret it more than I could imagine. I told her the only regret I'd had was letting things get this far in the first place. Then I turned to the movers. "You unload anything into this building, it's getting put right back in the truck at his expense." The movers looked at each other, One of them asked Alex quietly if they should just head back to the storage unit. Alex swore under his breath. His wife stared down at her shoes. After a long pause, Alex waved them off. They packed everything back into the truck. My mom didn't say another word as she walked back to her car, but the look she gave me said, this wasn't over. I figured that was the end of it, that they'd sulk for a while and eventually find another couch to crash on. But that night, at exactly 11:04 p.m., I got a text from Alex. You're going to regret this more than you think. I didn't reply. 2 days later, I found out what he meant. And it wasn't about money. It was personal. Very personal. 2 mornings later, I woke up to my phone buzzing nonstop. At first, I thought it was work. Maybe a new client issue or a supplier problem. But when I saw the flood of notifications, my stomach tightened. It wasn't emails. It wasn't work. It was social media. I had dozens of missed calls, a mountain of direct messages, and over 100 tag notifications. People I hadn't spoken to in years were sending me screenshots. Alex had gone public. On Facebook, he'd written a post that read like something out of a bad TV drama. How his own younger brother had kicked him, his wife and his child out onto the streets when they had nowhere else to go. He painted me as the cold, selfish businessman who forgot his roots the moment he had money in his pocket. Every fact that made him look bad was conveniently missing. He didn't mention the startup I'd been funding. He didn't mention the year plus I'd been paying their mortgage. He didn't mention the stunt they pulled with the moving truck. And of course, he left out the part where he humiliated me in front of every person I cared about at my graduation party. It had been shared almost 60 times by the time I saw it, with comment threads full of armchair moralists. Some were neutral people who clearly smelled something off in the story. Others were family friends, old neighbors, and distant relatives I barely remembered, leaving comments like, "Family is forever, and blood should come before business." But what really hit me were the comments from people I'd gone to school with. People who knew nothing about my life now, but clearly loved the drama. Things like, "Guess money changes people," and "Wow, I didn't think you were like this." By noon, my mom had left me 3 voicemails, each one angrier than the last. She didn't ask if any of it was true. She didn't care about the actual story. All she cared about was that this was making the family look bad, and that I needed to just make it right. That's when I decided I wasn't going to let Alex control the narrative. The next morning, I texted him, "Meet me at the condo. Noon." When I got there, I let myself in. I was already sitting at the kitchen table when he walked in, looking smug, like he expected me to apologize. I had a neat stack of papers in front of me, bank statements, loan documents, and transfer records showing every payment I had made toward his mortgage, every deposit into the startup, every expense I had covered. I didn't yell. I didn't make speeches. I slid the stack across the table. I told him that if he didn't take down that post by the end of the day and post the correction, I would send copies of those documents to every single person who shared his post, family, friends, investors, everyone. At first he smirked, said I wouldn't actually do it, but then I pulled out my phone and showed him the draft message I'd already typed up, complete with screenshots. His expression changed. That smugness vanished. That night, the post disappeared from Facebook without a word. No apology, no follow-up post, just gone. I thought maybe that would be the end of it, that finally we'd reach the point where he'd back off. I was wrong, because the following week, I made a move he never saw coming, one that wouldn't just close this chapter. It would lock the door behind it. A week went by without a single word from Alex. No calls, no texts, not even some passive-aggressive post online. The silence felt unnatural, like the air right before a storm. I knew him well enough to know he was either sulking or quietly plotting a comeback. But the thing was, I didn't care anymore. I'd already decided what my next move would be. That Friday morning, I sat in the downtown office of a lawyer I trusted and signed the final paperwork to invest in my friend Chris's startup. Chris was someone I'd known since my sophomore year of college. He wasn't flashy. He didn't run around making big promises, and he didn't play the victim when things got tough. For the past 2 years, he'd been building a tech platform on his own dime, working nights at a warehouse just to keep funding it. Every time we talked, his focus was on the work, not the attention, not the shortcuts. Months earlier, he'd asked if I'd consider coming in as a partner. Back then, I told him I couldn't, because my money was tied up with Alex's project. Now, my resources were free, and I wanted to put them where they might actually build something real. When the ink dried, I felt a calm I hadn't felt in months. That afternoon, I called my dad and asked if he wanted to meet for coffee. We sat by the window of a small cafe, and I slid the signed investment agreement across to him. He read it carefully, then set it down and said, "Good. At least it's going to someone who's earned it." By that evening, the news had already reached my mom. I didn't have to wonder how. Alex must have called her the second he found out. She left me 2 voicemails in a row, both saying almost the same thing. I was humiliating my brother by choosing to back someone else instead of helping him rebuild. She said I was spiteful and trying to make him look bad to the whole family. An hour later, Alex texted me, "Wow, guess you really are done." I didn't reply. 2 days later, I drove to the condo for one last conversation. I wanted this to be final, face to face, so there would be no room for him to twist my words later. When I walked in, Alex was on the couch scrolling on his phone, while his wife sat at the dining table paying bills. He didn't even look up at first. I stood there until he did. "I'm going to make this simple," I said. "From this point on, your life is in your hands. No more loans, no more bills covered, no shared accounts. Whatever happens from here, you handle it. I'm done." For a moment, he just stared at me like he was trying to figure out if I was bluffing. His wife glanced between us but didn't say a word. Finally, Alex laughed, not because he thought it was funny, but because he didn't know what else to do. "You'll regret this," he said quietly. I didn't answer. I walked out the door, down the hall, and didn't look back. That night, I sat in my apartment, looking at the contract with Chris's name on it, and I realized something that should have been obvious years ago. Blood isn't enough. You can be related to someone without actually being family. And once you see that clearly, there's no going back. Family, but not really family. And for the first time, I was completely fine with that. The update. It had been almost a month since I walked out of Alex's condo and told him I was done. The weeks after that felt different, like I'd finally cleared a noise I didn't realize had been constant in my life. No sudden phone calls asking for just a little help. No passive-aggressive messages. No guilt trips from my mom every other day. Chris's startup was moving faster than either of us expected. We had just finished a beta test, and the feedback was strong enough that we had a meeting lined up with a major investor. For the first time, in a long time, every dollar and every hour I put into something felt like it actually mattered. Then, on a Tuesday morning, a text popped up from a number I didn't recognize. "Check your mailbox. You'll want to see this. L." I didn't know who L was. No profile picture, no context. But I went downstairs, and sure enough, there was a thick, unmarked envelope wedged into my mail slot. Inside were printed screenshots, clear as day, of email threads between Alex and 2 of my old business contacts. The more I read, the slower I turn the pages. Alex had been trying to pitch my former investors on a relaunch of the project we once worked on together. Except in his version, it was entirely his idea. He had stripped my name from every detail. The email even claimed he'd personally designed and funded the early prototypes and mock-ups, the same ones I had paid for and developed through my contacts. Worse, he'd attached those original designs, my designs. I had no clue who L was, but based on how these emails landed in my hands, I had a feeling it was someone in Alex's own circle. Maybe someone who had finally gotten sick of watching him take shortcuts and burn people. I didn't waste time. That afternoon, I forwarded the screenshots to my lawyer and followed up with 2 very specific phone calls, one to each investor he'd contacted. I laid everything out, the real history of the project, who had paid for what, and how the attached prototypes were my intellectual property. By the end of the week, Alex's pitch was dead. The investors cut contact with him completely. I thought maybe he'd call me furious, but he didn't. Instead, my mom called, her voice sharp from the start. She accused me of ruining his future and kicking him when he's down. She didn't ask if the story was true. She didn't want details. All she cared about was that I'd stopped him from getting another lifeline. I told her this was exactly what happened when you burned every bridge you had and then tried to steal wood from someone else's to rebuild yours. The following Monday, Chris and I closed our first round of funding. Investors who once thought Alex's project had potential were now putting their money into something built on actual work. That night, I poured myself a drink and sat in my apartment, realizing something. Alex hadn't changed, and he never would. The only difference now was that he had no way to get close enough to pull me into the mess again, and I wasn't about to give him one.